Ah, okay. It looks like we are now going live. All right. Well, good morning, Royal We Fellowship. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for your patience. I'm so glad that you all have been waiting. I was having a little bit of an issue getting it connected and going. So for the past 10 minutes, I've been going back and forth. But welcome to Royal We Fellowship. Shabbat Shalom. And I'm so happy that you are here with me this morning. For those of you who are new to Royal We Fellowship, welcome. And we are wrapping up Genesis today. We are in Genesis 50 this morning. This is the final chapter, if you will. This is the conclusion of a powerful story that we've been following, the story of Joseph, and in dealing with the toxicity and the narcissistic abuse of his own brothers, who conspired in their young age to kill him and to actually throw him in a pit, which resulted in young Joseph being sold into slavery into Egypt, where he became, as we know, the incredible Joseph, the second in command under Pharaoh. Now, to wrap up this chapter in 50, we have a lot to learn here about two important things we're going to discuss here. Number one is forgiveness. Now, some say that forgiveness is not holding on to a grudge, but as we're going to find out, being forgiving of those who have traumatized you in life and who have caused pain in your life, even though forgiveness means you're not going to take revenge, it doesn't mean that you cannot hold on to hurt in your life. And as we're going to see by the end of this story, we're going to see that Joseph has held on to a certain amount of hurt and pain as a result of the narcissistic abuse that he endured by his brothers. The trauma in his life was so great that even though he was in the second in command in all of Egypt, he still was holding on to some hurt. He still was holding on to pain. And we're going to see that finally come out at the end of this chapter. The second thing that we're going to see is that kindness, the kindness of you and your authentic true self, the kindness of me, the kindness that we possess, it literally demands the repentance of narcissistic people. I'm going to say this again. Your kindness will ultimately demand the repentance of narcissistic people. Joseph's brothers in the story, they reached a point when they reconnected with Joseph where they could no longer take anything from Joseph. They could no longer take any further assistance without making things right. Joseph's kindness through his authenticity demanded their repentance without him even saying a word. And we're going to see how this plays out. And we're going to discuss ways in which this can be manifested in our own life. So follow me right now with Genesis chapter 50. Now, Genesis chapter 50 starts off with Joseph and his brothers around the time of Joseph's father, his dad, passing away. His father was Jacob. Jacob was renamed Israel. After Israel had blessed Joseph and blessed all of his brothers, and by the way, it was through the blessing of his brothers that we now understand the 12 tribes of Israel. And the 12 tribes are made up of the sons of Jacob. And, one of the misconceptions is that the 12 tribes of Israel are all good, when this is not the case at all. As a matter of fact, we know that two of them, Simeon and Levi, were absolutely just horrible people. They are, in fact, Jacob, as he blessed them, he said that you two are violent. You use swords and you string up oxen, and cursed be you, and basically, right? Let me not be in your counsel. And this is, by the way, one of the 12 tribes of Israel, violent and hostile. And so, when we hear talk about the 12 tribes of Israel, and I think that this is a powerful message in this for us, is that there is good and evil, even in those that say, well, it's all good. We have to have this understanding that it is in some aspect, it is all a part of what we understand taking place here on this earth. And so, yes, so all the 12 tribes of Israel are not good. But now, here in Genesis 50, we see that Joseph and his brothers begin to weep after the loss of their father. Now, on an individual level, we already know up to this point that Joseph has forgiven his brothers for what they did. How do we know that Joseph has forgiven his brothers. We know forgiveness because Joseph has not taken revenge on his brothers. Okay? Yes, Joseph brought them in. Joseph hid his true identity from them for a period of time. Uh, Joseph tested them to see if their hearts were still violent and hostile towards him. But Joseph has not exacted revenge. Joseph has not said, "You are the brothers who tried to kill me, therefore I'm going to string you up and chain you up forever," right? And how many of you have fallen into the trap of sometimes we can get stuck in our mind of the punishment that we believe narcissistic people and people who have hurt us, they need to go through. So Joseph is past that point. He's no longer trying to hurt his brothers. Joseph, from the very get-go, from the moment Joseph saw his brothers come to him in Egypt looking for food to eat because they were hungry, Joseph's identity was hidden. But when he saw his brothers, he knew in that instant, in that moment, this is why. This is why my brothers had to hate me. This is why I had to experience that trauma. This is why I endured narcissistic abuse, because here I am now feeding my brothers who are hungry, and it's up to me whether they live or die. And I wouldn't be in this position had I not been rejected by my own brothers. So he understood this and offered forgiveness. Now, because Joseph gave forgiveness and decided in his heart that he was not going to hurt them or punish them or exact revenge on them, it doesn't mean that Joseph did not store the pain. He did not carry the burden. And now you and I, we deal with this coming out of narcissistic abuse. Chances are you have forgiven the narcissistic people in your life, whether it's your family members, your parents, your brothers, your sisters, your old teachers, your ex-boyfriends, your ex-husbands, your ex-wives, whatever the case may be. Chances are you have, in fact, forgiven them. Forgiveness simply means that you do not hold on to conspiring to hurt them or take out revenge or anything like that. And that's where we see Joseph. Joseph was not in a place where he wanted to take revenge. But what it does not mean is that we let go of all hurt. Don't think for a minute that forgiveness means you let go of hurt, because that's just not the case. Hurt requires something else to let go of in our lives. We need to wait that part out. We need to carry the burden of the hurt, of the trauma that we have experienced. Why do we carry the burden of the trauma? Well, I'm still trying to figure this out myself, but I can tell you this, Royal We Fellowship, that it's the hurt inside of my life, of the trauma that I have endured, that allows me to be here in front of you, to speak with you, to have fellowship, to do the Royal We videos. In other words, it's a bittersweet venture, if I can say that. It's through hurt, it's through pain, it's through the trauma of my life that I speak these things. And so there comes an understanding that this hurt is somewhat of a driving force. But the hurt is still there. And even though I forgive people in my life, meaning I don't want to hurt them in return, I wish them no ill will, I still hold on to a certain amount of hurt in my own life. You may be holding on to hurt in your own life. So what happens with this hurt? We see in Genesis chapter 50, verses 1 through 3, that Joseph and his brothers are preparing for the burial of their father Jacob. In verse 4, when the days of mourning had passed, Joseph said to Pharaoh's court, "If I found favor in your eyes, speak to Pharaoh for me. Tell him my father made me swear an oath to have him buried in a tomb that was dug for him out in the land of Canaan. Now let me go and bury my father, then I'll return." So in other words, Joseph did not want to bury his father in Egypt because his father Jacob was not an Egyptian. And so he asked permission from the Pharaoh to bury his father elsewhere, the land of Canaan. And now this is important. Joseph wanted to make sure that Pharaoh understood, and even Joseph understood his place in Egypt. Joseph, even though he was the second in command, still humbled to the point where he requested permission from Pharaoh. "Please let me go bury my father," out of respect for Pharaoh. Now, this is very important. This is an extreme amount of humility. This is a place of Joseph, even though he's the second in command, even though Pharaoh put a ring on his finger and said, "Everybody here answers to you, except me." Joseph, because of the trauma he experienced, has an ingrained sense of how to create peace in and around people, in and around the perceived hierarchies. What I'm trying to say is that as long as we are in this world, there are going to be perceived hierarchies. This in no way, shape, or form means that you need to endure abuse, but it does mean that when you are working for somebody, when you have a boss above you, that if you want to survive in this world of narcissism, that you acknowledge those in positions above you and you serve as though you are serving to God. As a matter of fact, we find this out later in other chapters in the Bible, where the Bible does indicate this. When you are working for somebody, serve people as though you are serving God. It does not matter if they are narcissistic or not. In fact, the Pharaoh was probably one of the most narcissistic people the world has ever known. The Pharaoh actually, in this book of Genesis, killed the master chef, the baker, right? Because of whatever reason. He didn't like the way he cooked his bread or something to that extent. So we know that Pharaoh was extremely narcissistic, yet Joseph figured this game out based on what he witnessed and the traumatization by his brothers. So the trauma that you experience from narcissistic abuse, it is teaching you something. It is teaching you a level of humility to be used in the right way, not to be used in an abusive situation, not that you stay in abuse. You need to go no contact. You need to get away. But when you are on good terms with certain personality types, you learn how to navigate and take advantage of these positions that you're put in. And this becomes part of that game. Joseph ended up being a part of this game. And so now this is just another example of how Joseph is maintaining his popularity, if you will, with the Pharaoh by constantly submitting himself. And in exchange, he learned that by submitting himself to Pharaoh, that he is being kept as the second most powerful person in Egypt. Okay? And so Joseph is asking Pharaoh's permission to go and bury his father. Now, when they reached the place where they were burying the father, the Canaanites lived there. They saw the mourning, and the Egyptians were holding a solemn ceremony mourning the loss of Jacob. And this is why the place near the Jordan is called Abel Mizraim. And this is where they celebrated the loss, or they mourned the loss, if you will, of Jacob. Not celebrated, they mourned. Forgive me. Typically, today it seems we celebrate the life of somebody who passes away. Back then, they mourn. And again, understand that back then, there wasn't an understanding because Jesus had not yet come and said, "This day, I tell you, you will be with me in paradise." So at this time, pre-Jesus, they had no idea what happened to somebody when they deceased. They went to sleep. They had no idea what that meant necessarily because there was not the message of Jesus saying, "I've come to redeem and to awaken people." They had no idea. So they mourned. They literally mourned the loss and the absence of a being. And in this case, they mourned the loss of their father, Jacob. Now, this is where we get into see forgiveness. Joseph reassures his brothers in verse 15 of chapter 50. Verse 15, it says this: "When Joseph's brothers saw that their father was now dead, they said, 'What if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him?'" His brothers were thinking about it. After all, his brothers threw Joseph in a pit, and Joseph can clearly hear his brothers actually conspire and talk about ways in which they could have killed him. This all happened back when they were young children. And so both Joseph and his brothers remember all this very well. His brothers actually remember it more than Joseph at this point. Why? Because Joseph is in control. Joseph is now in power. The power dynamic has shifted in Joseph's favor because of Joseph's humility. Because of Joseph's ability to forgive, Joseph is now in absolute power over his brothers. And so Joseph's brothers, because of their hearts, because of their narcissism, because of their inability to be humble in life, they view Joseph as potentially being like them. And this is how narcissistic people view the world. Your narcissistic abuser that you dealt with views you as being just like them. Chances are they attack you because they view you as one day wanting to attack them. This is how they lived their lives. This is how Joseph's brothers lived their lives. So they said, what if Joseph is holding a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did? In verse 16, they sent word to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you were to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of your servants of the God your father. When their message came to him, Joseph cried. He wept. It says in verse 17, when this news that Joseph's brothers were begging for forgiveness, pleading for forgiveness for the wrongs they did. And this, by the way, is the first time that the brothers finally said, we're wrong for what we did. Please forgive us. Joseph wept. What did that crying mean? Why did Joseph cry? The way I understand this story and from what I believe, and this is because many of us, myself included, have often wished and longed and desired for the people who have been most traumatic to us in our lives, the people who have abused us, the people who have taken advantage of us, the people who have conspired to hurt us, the people who have held us back. These people, we have longed for them to apologize. We have longed for them to acknowledge their ways. But since they have not, in many cases, it causes us to hold on and entrap this sense of pain, this sense of fear, this pain, this sense of being hurt. It's like we take it in and it's stuck there, and this hurt now lives with us. And I believe that for the longest time, the hurt lived within Joseph up until now. So everything that we have seen Joseph do, his humbleness throughout, his not taking revenge on his brothers, all of this done, his forgiveness of his brothers, has all been done with Joseph still being hurt. So the question now to you and to me is, are we still able to be kind to narcissistic people that we deal with, even though we're hurt? The answer is yes, we can. Joseph was clearly still hurt by the actions of his brothers. He still was holding it. Can we be successful in this life still carrying hurt? The answer is yes, we can. Can we do great things in this life still carrying hurt? The answer is yes, we can. Can we forgive toxic people in our life, meaning we don't try to hurt them in return? We don't try to take revenge out on them. Can we do this while still being hurt? And the answer is yes, we can. I do it, and you still do it on a daily basis too. And Joseph here is a prime example of how to even become the second in command under Pharaoh while still carrying hurt. As a matter of fact, at some point, I would say that hurt becomes the driving force of the best things in your life that you can do. The greatest things in your life that you can become are oftentimes driven by hurt. I believe the story of Joseph reaching the status of being the second in command of the biggest nation of the world. We're talking about vice president status, right? Greater than that, even. And what drove him to that place, what made him suitable for that place, was in fact his hurt. His hurt that he was carrying with him in life made him qualified, more than qualified, suited him to do that great task, to submit to Pharaoh and to be the second in command and to save his own brothers, the narcissistically abusive people. Now watch this. Joseph's brothers apologized, and here's the second lesson in that. After Joseph's brothers sent this message to Joseph saying, forgive your brothers. Finally, for the first time, they're saying, forgive them for their sins against you. Forgive them. Forgive your brothers. It says this in verse 18. His brothers then came and they threw themselves down before him. Joseph's brothers, the same ones that tried to kill him when they were children, now threw themselves down before him, saying, "We are your slaves," they said. And Joseph was able to respond, "Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God?" In verse 20, Joseph says to them, "You intended me harm." He acknowledges it. "You intended me harm. You wanted to kill me. You got rid of me. We were so young. I just wanted to be accepted by you. You were my brothers. You were my family. And you intended me harm through the hate and the malice and the whatever in your life. You wanted me gone. And I've lived with this pain all my life." That's why Joseph cried. Joseph's crying was actually that we saw in verse 17. Joseph's crying was the release, I believe, of that trauma for the first time. He released it. He released that hurt. Sometimes we'll never know when it's going to happen, but I believe that is the moment. After all these years, that was finally when he released that pain through crying, because his brothers finally acknowledged that they were evil and they caused him hurt. He was able to finally let go of that hurt that was trapped inside. I guess, in other words, you could say it as the narcissistically abusive people in this situation took the hurt back. Finally. And this is what happened. Why did Joseph's brothers do that? Why did Joseph's brothers reach this point where they were throwing themselves at his feet saying, "We are your slaves"? The second point in this is that Joseph's brothers had no choice, because Joseph's kindness through his authenticity demanded their repentance. You see, we sometimes think that we're going to get narcissistically abusive people who've traumatized us. We think we're going to go and yell at them and point our finger and shake our finger at them and say, "You need to apologize to me. You were wrong," and blah, blah, blah. But what we see in this story is that's not at all what Joseph did. Not ever. What Joseph did do. Let's look at what Joseph did do in the story. He forgave them, meaning while he was hurting because of what they did, he still gave them food. He fed them. That's forgiveness, by the way. Forgiveness means you're not wishing any ill on anybody. We also see that Joseph, even though, and that's being authentic, by the way, too. Joseph was being true to himself the entire time, which means he was being kind to them. He maintained his humbleness. Now, what Joseph didn't do is become best friends with them. We can clearly see that because his brothers were still distant from him. The brothers were still under the impression that Joseph might hurt them. That's why they wrote that letter. Why would they feel that way? Because Joseph was still distant from them. Forgiveness in this life does not mean we become best friends with these people. It does not mean we unite with those who hurt us. Not at all. It just means we act out in kindness. And now watch, this kindness is what demanded his brother's repentance. It demanded the narcissistically abusive people's repentance, because there is no way narcissistic people, there is absolutely zero, there is no chance that they can continue to take from a person who is not engaging in ill will, violence, hostility. They cannot even face it because they feel so undeserving. The shame finally catches up to them, and they cannot deal with that shame. In other words, as they are receiving food from somebody who they tried to kill without saying anything, their own shame, their narcissistic shame will eat them alive. I now understand what it says in the New Testament when it says, "Love your enemies, and in doing so, you will heap hot coals on their head." Now, obviously, as I said, this does not mean you continue to be friends with. It does not mean you continue to talk with them on a daily basis. It does not mean you go to narcissistic people's parties. It does not mean you visit your toxic family. No contact is the best. But what it is saying is that when someone is in need, no matter if they were abusive to you or not, if someone's life depends on it, you authentically act out of your own kindness, which is authentic to you, right? That's the kindness that places you in high places, by the way. And what you will notice is that even the most narcissistic people, at some point, they can't take from you any longer when they know what they deserve. They know that they deserve you to fight. Many narcissistic people want to drag you into fighting because they know that's what they deserve. And when you fight with them, when you engage with them, you're proving their point about you. You're giving them what they want, which is treating them the way they feel they need to be treated so that they don't feel guilty. They feel justified. This is what creates the cycle of abuse. We know this is the cycles in narcissistic abuse. If they abuse you, they actually long for you to revenge yourself, to avenge yourself, to abuse them back. Why? Because then that justifies their actions towards you, and they never have to feel ashamed of themselves. What we see in the story of Joseph is that Joseph fed them when they were hungry. He forgave them and said, "Don't worry, I will take care of you." So in his position of power, they could not handle their own shame anymore. Who is this guy who is caring for us and giving to us when we tried to kill him? That shame in and of itself ate them alive. Typically, when people reach this point where that type of shame, they really only have two choices. A narcissistic person can either go and kill themselves, or they can fall on their face and beg for forgiveness. But this only comes when a few things happen. One, they are in need, as they were in need with Joseph. So if a toxic person is in need from you, and then two, your authentic self shows kindness, not in being friends and family, but just kindness, authentic kindness. This is what drives a narcissistic person into shame. And so this is important for you and I to understand. This is a powerful story. And then after this, the Genesis wraps up, chapter 50 wraps up with Joseph then passing away. He lived to be 110 years old. He saw the third generation of Ephraim's children. Also the children of Machir and Manasseh were placed at the birth of Joseph's knees. Joseph said to his brothers, "I'm about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on an oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob." Another indication right there that Joseph knew that Egypt was not the place where they were going to be. This is also why Joseph was able to submit to Pharaoh. He acted as though, even though Pharaoh made him second in command of Egypt, Joseph always maintained that he didn't really belong there. He was out of place, just fulfilling the role that God had given him. The true marks of a humble individual. A humble individual. With that, bless you, everybody who's a part of Royal We Fellowship. I truly hope that this message and the story of Joseph speaks to your hearts as it has spoken to mine. Next Saturday, next Shabbat, we're going to continue on through the Old Testament. We're getting out of Genesis, and we're going to move on into the later books. And now, for those of you who have people who you'd like to invite to Royal We Fellowship, if you think this is good and helpful, then please invite them. And I look forward to being here next Saturday. Have a blessed weekend, everybody. I am going to be posting videos all week on the Royal We channel. I have a reaction video that's going to be uploaded today. And then tomorrow, I'm also going to be doing a special, unique video that is about the 5 most narcissistic characters out of the book of Genesis. I'm going to be putting, based on what we have learned together, I'm going to be making a video on the regular Royal We channel that talks about the 5 most narcissistic, at least from my perspective. So look for that video on the Royal We channel. And we will be back here next Saturday morning. Have a blessed weekend, everybody, and a blessed week. Shabbat Shalom, and I will see you next Saturday right here on Royal We Fellowship.